I'm usually just shouting without any slides. So, hi everybody. Thanks, James. That was brilliant. And Jim, you're going to come up as well and have a wee sit next to me.
If you like.
Yeah. Just so people can see your face as well and know who you are today. So, my name's Lee. I'm Lee Hamilton. I'm one of the 2 ranger managers for the national park, and Jim's the other ranger manager. So Jim Downey, and we're going to take you out later on this afternoon. So just so you know our faces before we kick off. All right. There we are, James. You got a wee mention there on the slide. I didn't realise you were on there. There you go. So, for those of you who haven't been to Loch Lomond in the Trossachs National Park, it's Scotland's first national park, Cairngorms being the second. We are 720 square miles of national park that takes in over 50 rivers, 22 large lochs, numerous small lochs and loch-ins, so lots and lots of water bodies within the national park. And then obviously that's just a small snippet of what Scotland's landscape and countryside is all about, really. So we're also a national park that has quite a lot of people living around about the loch shores and communities, so we've got quite a lot of stakeholders that we work with in various communities across the national park. So it's quite a diverse range of people, businesses, residents, scientific research. There's lots of schools and colleges obviously that come to the national park, so we're focusing on a lot of visitors as well as residents and people that are living and breathing here. So over 4 million visitors to the national park, believe it or not. And in certain areas in the national park we have bylaws which manage our camping season. So from March to September we've got bylaws that were introduced in 2017 to manage quite a lot of the areas that were being decimated by irresponsible behaviour. So around the majority of loch shores, it's only 4% of the national park, but very much governed by bylaws which the rangers enforce. So they enforce around the loch shores, and we enforce bylaws on Loch Lomond. So the Loch Lomond bylaws were introduced in 1996, and the Loch Lomond the camping management zones, which we can point out later on today in another map, were introduced in 2017. Now I manage 2 teams within the national park, and Jim manages 2 teams. So essentially we've split geographically. This is a big, expansive area, but the national park in itself is about an hour's drive from the central belt of Scotland, so we actually have a lot of local visitors, local people that come to the national park for their weekend destination or weeks at a time. But Jim's teams are based on east at Balmaha, the east side team, and then the Trossachs and Breadalbane team. So there's a team based at Callander, and there's a team based at Loch Earn as well, so a very, very big area. My teams are on Loch Lomond itself, the boat team, and on the west team. So that covers the area from Balloch right up to Cairnlarach and right down to Argentiny and Cowell. So another big area. So you can imagine that's why there's two of us. One person alone cannot manage that amount of team, especially in the summer. We have 20 permanent staff, rangers, and then we take on, in the last 2 years, we've taken on about 50 staff. And that's because we've had extra funding because of the visitor pressures that we've seen over the last few years because of the pandemic. So we know that probably that won't happen next year, but roughly we have about 30 seasonal staff. We've taken on an extra 20 over the last couple of years. That just gives you a wee snippet of the scale, and our patrolling, 7 days a week we're out there patrolling, speaking to thousands of people day in, day out. And one of the key messages is for our rangers to engage with people about responsible behaviour in the countryside, as well as talking about fire, responsible fire lighting, and now in the last few years really honing in on water safety advice. So that's just a wee background from us, okay? So the journey for us water safety wise, well, it started with, in 2018, us reading Scotland's Drowning Prevention Strategy, and we've got Carney here today from Water Safety Scotland and ROSPA. And very much the advice in there meant we were, right, okay, what are we going to do? Some of our sites had already had certain controls like public rescue equipment and a few wee bits of signage, but nothing consistent. And we really needed to address that. So what was the first port of call for us was to contact ROSPA and get a bit of a consultation and see how our sites, how was the land lying really on our sites? What was the things that were good? What were the things that were bad? What were the recommendations that we needed? Like James said, there's no right and wrong way. But we did need to address that document there and think about what our objectives were as a National Park Authority. So obviously the numbers are slightly different. That's taken direct from the strategy itself, but James has said we've got a 96 fatality rate at the moment, and it's gone up in the last year or so. So we want to see what we can do to curtail that. One of the things that we've looked at, just before we go on to that slide, I'll let you look at that just now, but basically the project team that was set up, we had to look at who was the best people within our organisation. And I know this is, by speaking to some of the PAWS partners, this is sometimes the starting block is the hurdle. Who is it that's going to lead on it? Where are we getting the funding from? And all these questions that come up. Now, we had to start somewhere, and we didn't want to reinvent the wheel. So we very much looked at best practice that was already in existence. And Perth and Kinross is one of our partner local authorities, and they've got a fantastic water safety policy. RNLI, their signage is fantastic. Why did we need to reinvent the wheel? But what we needed to do was look at something consistent for Loch Lomond in our national park. So we created a project team, and that was myself as a ranger manager, the estates manager, the visitor operations manager for the national park, the comms manager, a legal representative. We've got a legal team of 3 lawyers within the national park, and our access officer. So that was the project team. That's what made it up. Lots of experience from different areas in the organisation and different backgrounds. So we started looking at the RNLI signage and thinking, right, how are we going to look at this? But we realised there was one important element of this process that was missing. We hadn't embarked on our visitor risk assessment process. And in 2019, our previous health and safety advisor, Stuart's obviously joined us recently, she started looking at the visitor safety group and how we can work together with you guys to stop us having to reinvent something that was already in existence. So we looked at the visitor risk assessment process, and we looked at the fact that we didn't actually have a comprehensive suite of site risk assessments, and we needed to tie it all together. Along with the ROSPA report that we had, the consultation which had the recommendations, was looking at a water safety risk assessment. So we're sitting here going, okay, well that means we need 3 lots of risk assessments, right? How do we condense this down so that we're not having to do water safety and then site and then visit? But we realised we could merge it together. So we merged the water safety element of the risk assessment in with the visitor safety risk assessment and the site risk assessment. Now I'm going to hand to Jim, because Jim's been integral from the process from the start, looking at our first visitor risk assessment, which was at Bracklin Falls up in Callander, a very popular place, and a few hazards that can be hidden to the public. So Jim, we started looking at the template, didn't we? And then I'll hand over to you, and you can have a wee.
I think, thanks Lee. So, as Lee says, we're pretty new to Visitor Safety Group. Stuart's predecessor, Sharon, came along and had a look at our health and safety. And National Park's a mixture of owned and managed sites. We have some sites that we have some management agreements on. We also have sites where we encourage folk to, but we don't have necessarily a management agreement on that site. So there's a number of different ways that that we look at sites and we manage and encourage people with sites. And Sharon was particularly interested in visitor and site risk assessments. So if you've got these things in place, we've always been spent our time looking at risk assessments for things, for our staff, for leading groups. So there's risk assessments for chainsaws and strummers and leading volunteers, but we never really looked at our sites in that way. We never looked at them, and we certainly didn't really consider them we were visitors. We had probably a couple of false starts over the years to try and make something happen. Never quite got that consistency. So Sharon came back from a visitor safety group meeting and was very enthused about this, and particularly in looking at your matrix and thinking about how the role, as we've been talking about earlier today, of our responsibility to visitors, but also visitors' responsibility for taking personal care of themselves, and how that changes depending on what type of site that you're visiting. And that actually was really useful. So we went out and had a go at doing a visitor risk assessment, and it was a huge thing. It was massive. It was a site and a visitor risk assessment both in one. It was a defect. It was like capturing failures and bits of infrastructure, and it's just gigantic, and it didn't seem very useful. So what were we going to do? So we had to think about it, and we decided we would split it out into two different things. We've got sites, we stuff on it. How do we manage that stuff? How do we make sure that stuff doesn't endanger anybody? How do we make sure we're looking after it and capturing that down? But then how does our visitors interact with our site? How does their behaviours interact with our site? And how do we try and take that into account as well when we're thinking about their safety? And at the same time, the water safety strategy, the water safety project came along, and that started to build with momentum. As James talked about, the pause groups started to come along. That really started to provide a lot of energy and a lot of momentum into it. So the reason why we've managed to get our site and visitor risk assessments done is driven by the momentum that comes from that project. That gave us a reason for doing it. Not that we needed a reason, but it gave us that push to move on. So we very much, as I say, split out site, split out visitor, and then had to think about, because of course if we're going to install PRE, we have to think, why are we doing that? Is there a good reason for it? We didn't have those risk assessments in the first place, and that's where the ROSPA stuff came in. So having that information from ROSPA gave us the confidence to go and help. So it's a bit, it's a bit of the cart before the horse, but we had to start somewhere. So, and I think that's where delving in from some, James, you'll know that from some of the members of PAWS, it's where they start and who they allocate to start that process. Thanks, Jim. That's really good. And obviously, in terms of the elements from the water safety risk assessment, the elements that we've included in our visitor risk assessment and site risk assessment are the basic ones that you'll be familiar with: is edge protection, the planting of any sort of vegetation to avoid desire lines appearing, or at least close the gap. The footpaths and accessibility to water, whether there's fencing or barriers required, whether there's signage or whether there's PRE. And some of the factors in the risk assessment that we take into consideration is there historical incidents? Have there been fatalities at these sites? And the answer to some of our sites in West Loch Lomond was yes. And we did have some fatalities at these sites, and it's because of the sudden drop. So we had to look at that in all its entirety. What is it that's hidden? The public aren't aware of this sudden drop. And that's something that we've got consistent on the signage where we do have signage. We do not want to plaster the countryside with signage and PRE. We know it's the last resort. Preventative measures are obviously the best. Education, getting out there, raising awareness, talking to people is the best method that we can absolutely use. And we do it every day with the rangers that are out there. But where we needed some controls, we've had to look at that, and we've obviously done that. Where you can see here, we've got the enclosed cabinet. We've stuck with the circular cabinet. Depending on the site, it obviously might hold a ring, it could hold two throw lines, but we've stuck with the circular one because we felt that was the consistent approach. People know what that means. Some of the smaller throw line stations are cylindrical, and people walk past them, they don't know what they are. We know that we've seen the big boards that some canal-based or water bodies have, especially down south. They're fantastic, and they've got the locked equipment. You press a code and everything else, and you can get access to that. But we wanted to stick with the basic, consistent approach there. What we did, we obviously decided what type of throw line to go for, and that was again through our NLI consultation, talking to our NLI, what was the best ones, what did they use. Looking at the sort of the more robust ones, these B lines are, not cheap, but essentially we're not seeing a lot of damage or theft or vandalism because of the enclosed cabinet, whereas before we saw people abusing the rings or abusing the rope. The enclosed cabinets with the little tamper-proof seal really makes a difference, and we've encouraged our partners to go for that enclosed cabinet so that it does minimise further damage, further cost to them. But what we also realised is we needed to think about, and through ROSPA recommendations, the sign that tells people where they are, with the Ordnance Survey coordinates, but also with what 3 words. We decided to add what 3 words as an extra measure because we realised the emergency services were using it more, the public were using it more. So we thought we'd add that in. Now, it's not to everyone's favour, and not everyone likes it, I get that, but we've not got rid of the grid reference, and we're certainly still going to have the name of the location of where people are. But we went with that, and in Scotland, slightly different to England, the police coordinate inland rescues water and land. And so in Loch Lomond specifically, the coordination is through Police Scotland.
and there's a charity rescue boat that's been on the loch since 1970, and that's deployed by Police Scotland. So if people are there and they're round about the loch, they understand it's police they're asking for, because the misconception, as we're all aware, as much as we all know, HM Coast Guard is the person you're asking for on the coast. Some people think it is inland as well, and to minimise the time taken for rescues, we wanted to make that very clear. But something that we've been working on through PAWS is that consistent approach, making sure people are aware of that message. So we went with the green and white. Green and white is usually something that indicates an instruction in buildings such and such, so we stuck with that for outside so people could see that very clearly. And the signs are made of reflective material to assist in hours of darkness, so we very much took on board opinions from RNLI at that time and WASPA. Okay, a couple other things just in terms of the project and how it got underway. We obviously have the water safety policy, and that came from guidance from ROSPA, and to promote consistency, the understanding of our roles, better reputation, lessen threat of legal action. And you know, as much as that's quite a sort of start set of criteria, it's not, you know, it's not exhaustive, because there's other reasons why you do it, is so that we can see in black and white what is our responsibilities, what do we need to do. Here's a process for risk assessment. Doesn't mean that you're going out and putting it everywhere on all our sites, and we only own a small amount of sites or manage a small amount of sites. So we felt that the water safety policy in 2019-20 was the start of our journey. It's not fully signed off yet, because we've been waiting until, again, the cart before the horse. We've been waiting till all the processes in place for the risk assessment, so we can absolutely 100% define our water safety policy. But we've also got seasonal water safety posters identified for key access points to the lochs and rivers, and they really bolster the permanent hazard sign. So where we don't need it 100% of the time through the warm summer months, and where we see activity increased, we'll put these signs at these key locations. We've got focused water safety messages displayed on the website when people are booking to go to campsites or our permit sites. These are informal places and wild places in the permit sites. They're not a campsite, they're not informal campsite, they're literally an exemption within the camping management zone to camp, and predominantly next to water. So before you can even book, the messages come up about the dangers of water and alcohol, drugs and water, and just the water in darkness, and safety messages to say if you're going to be in the water, think about your own capabilities and some of the ramifications that come if you're not thinking about your safety and children and the likes. But we've also got a QR code that the rangers take out, so people they're given advice, they're given the QR code, and people can scan that, and it takes them to the dedicated web page, our water safety web page, which is all the links to all the agency, the crucial agency criteria, where it's not reinventing the wheel. It's talking about float to live. It's talking about RLSS, the dangers of drinking and next to alcohol, drinking and next to water. It's preventative measures. It's wearing a wetsuit. It's cold water shock. It's the hidden dangers. It's all these things that all our agencies and partners have already done. They've already done the hard work. So another wee before and after, just before we move on, is just thinking about what was there before, what ROSPA assessed, and what we ended up in the long run. You can see a sort of semi-enclosed life ring holder, a bit sort of older, and it's not as prominent, it's not as bright. The sign was terrible. It was one little sign saying about the sudden drop, and it blended in there. People probably walked past it, it was too low. So we've got, you know, this is a site that you're going to go to this afternoon. And Firkin is quite a big, wide site, so there's plenty of places where it's not spoiling the scenery. Okay, this one, you could look at it and go, it's spoiling the scenery, it's spoiling the pitch, but there's plenty of places around about it. It has to be a prominent place, and it really is at the end of a path where people come from the car park and before they go on and explore the shoreline. So that's what we're seeing there, the enclosed ring and the hazard signage predominantly focusing on cold water, sudden drop, and the fact that areas of the shoreline is deep as well. And you've seen all that before. And this is just another before and after. As you can see, people use it because it's on a pontoon. Sometimes boats come up and they'll use the rope to tie up, and they just leave it straggling, left behind, and it can end up being a trip hazard and the likes on the pontoon. So nice, fresh and closed cabinet with the information signage in the front telling people where they are and the location. So stark contrast to what it was before, and it's a simple upgrade. It's not a hugely taxing upgrade. We had to replace some of our kit anyway, so this is just like for like where we already had existing PRE. Oh. And then a little bit more about the hazard signage where you're going to see some of these this afternoon. This is at the slipway, so again focusing on the fact it's motorised craft. There's varying water depths because of the pontoon as it's leaving the land, going into the water. And we've got bylaws in the law, so a little bit about the life jackets that are required, and that's the people don't realise you have to have life jackets or buoyancy aids on your vessel, motorised or non-motorised on Loch Lomond. So we put that on the signage this year. We actually changed it from last year and inserted that little bit of information there. And also the signage now includes a QR code so people can go up and scan it on the sign to take them back to the watch safety page where all the other agencies' information lies as well. But where are these signs located? Well, they're not repeated halfway along unless we feel it's necessary. They are predominantly at the area where people are funneling into the site. So it's one stop location for the signage, and it Falls of Falloch in particular, this one here, it's from the car park in the pathway where the path starts towards the actual fall. So it's not littering the actual nature site with the signage. It's predominantly focusing on the point of leaving their car to walk along to the site. And in that particular site, we risk assessed we didn't need public rescue equipment because it wouldn't make any difference. But the signage was a crucial bit, and it's focusing on the hidden hazards. It's not about telling people the obvious. It's the hidden hazards that are there. It's the fact that you could get close to the edge and you could slip, but you need to remember that it's your responsibility, and that's where we're all here today. We all know that ultimately it's the public's responsibility to be careful themselves on anywhere in the countryside. Some of our seasonal campaign signs are here, and again just a wee brief glance at that just now. That's the ones we made up last year, and this year now we've got them with the bylaw information included. Generic signage, this one was put out at most places around the national park, so it wasn't just focusing on Loch Lomond. We obviously have seen an increase in stand-up paddleboarding activity and kayaking, and it's promoting best behaviour. Wear a buoyancy aid if you can, but on Loch Lomond you have to have them on board. Don't have to wear them at the moment, and the bylaw review might change that, but at the moment they have to have sufficient life jackets on board a vessel, and a vessel constitutes a paddleboard, believe it or not. Okay. And these are the new ones for 2022. So these are the ones that have been the hugely impactful signs. The aerial photographs showing the shallow water to the deep water. We've added a little bit of annotated it slightly just to show the line where that could be. A lot of families come up here, and I spoke to over 40 on Saturday at an event, and half of them weren't aware how close to shore that drop was. And these are the people that we're really targeting with our social media campaign, because it's those people who aren't expected to be in the water above their waist. They're paddling, they're out with their family having a picnic, they decide to get it cool off, and they go out. When there's families picnicking here, how close are the kids when they're out here? And that's what happened last year when we had the tragic events of one weekend late in July, and 5 people died in Loch Lomond, and it was all a result of this steep drop off close to shore, getting in, cold water shock affects them, and they're away. How do we educate folk? We do it at schools, and we talk to the kids about the dangers of cold water shock, but for the visitor approaching us and being on site, whether the rangers are able to convey that message by engaging with them. These posters do a wee bit of that. I'm not saying that people are going to stop and read it, because we know that people don't read signs, but if there's something visually there for them to focus on, we feel that that is the best target this year for us to get that message across. So that's out on social media, it's at the key sites. We're trying to rotate our signage so it's not just left in place and then it's sign blindness. We're trying to rotate it so it's a focal point for the key months.
So these in particular, these signs, we share that on social media, and they get lots of hits. It's amazing how much interest those particular signs about sudden drops generate.
Yeah.
Really.
So just a little bit of the partnership update. James has covered it all, to be honest, so I'm not going to go over it too much there. But just in terms of some of the work we did with Western Berkshire Council on the River Leven, again, from a couple of fatalities over the years on the River Leven, we'll take a walk down there later. Absolutely nothing around the River Leven. As James said, they got the life rings donated for the bridges, but we've managed to, through the pause group, make Western Berkshire think about their site there, and also the Scottish enterprise on the west side of the river. So we've had public rescue equipment installed there. They're looking at some hazard signage. They're thinking about their water safety policy. So all really good stuff. In terms of the Minister's action plan, like you touched on it, James, in terms of that, there's 4 main criteria from the Minister's action plan: intelligence gathering and sharing, awareness raising, skills training and response. So some of the local Montroses National Park targets were to obviously think about our events, and we've got a timetable of events. We've had 4 already, and that's with the partnership agencies, mainly the pause groups, and they're dotted all around the different sites, different honeypots, sort of really busy spots around Loch Lomond, as well as our interaction daily with the rangers. And we've also got volunteer rangers who go out and they do sort of pop-up info stations, and it's not just water safety, it's fire, responsible fire lighting, it's responsible camping, littering, all the other issues that can come with irresponsible behaviour in the countryside. We also look at training. James touched on that. Hugely influential training exercises, and we've got a couple more coming up this year as well, James, which is great. Education, we've been working with Education Scotland and looking at some of the online resources that they've got. We've helped with the videos for some of the schools, and working with Laura as well from RNLI in terms of the education resources. Not reinventing the wheel, just sharing best practice, and that's where we've been doing it now for over 15 years, taking experiential learning to local schools for the primary 7s, talking to them about the cold water shock, the hidden dangers, the signage, all the things that you want to embed in a youngster's life so that they remember it, and they do. I've been out in Loch Lomond. It was 4 years in the boat team, and kids coming up to me and saying, "I remember you 3 years ago when you came and told me about cold water shock, and that's why I wear a life jacket." That's all you want. You want to make a difference, and if you can make a difference to one person, it's worth it. So where are we going forward? Well, with the new signage, it's more of the same, but just thinking about targeting that visual. It's about the pictorial signage, it's about learning through visualisation. We do it in Nature Scot, RNLI do it, RLSS do it. It's exactly the type of behaviour change that we want to see, and people learn by looking and seeing things instead of reading lots of literature. It's definitely the way forward. We've asked the rescue boat to move temporarily from Luss to Bala to reduce rescue response times, and that works really well. This is the 2nd year in a row they've been doing it. And obviously we're working on with stakeholders to improve water safety, and like James said, we've got another event to target businesses and stakeholders so that their staff are fully trained in waterside responder and can assess a situation and deal with it accordingly. And finally, we're just going to do more of raising awareness through our social media, through our website, at the visitor centres, through patrols, through the visit of the volunteer rangers when they're out and about in their routes, pop-up info stations and events. So I hope that gives you a wee bit of an insight into what we've been doing over the last couple of years, but it's not, there's no right or wrong answer, I don't think, with water safety. It's just trying our best and working with the partners, and with James and Caroline and Michael Averill from RNLI, and Albert Bruce, who was James' colleague and has just retired recently. There's been a family has been created over the last couple of years with this, and we're very much working with each other and learning from each other, so there's no right or wrong. There's no right or wrong questions, there's no right or wrong answers. At times we just need to work better together. Thanks for listening, guys, and we'll see you all this afternoon.
Thank you.